The last time I saw my father, Walter, he was wearing that straw hat, laughing with the other members of the Rose Society. It was July 1955. The next day, they were all gone. The entire society vanished from our small town. For 21 years, the garden they built was left to die, a monument to the mystery. Then, in 1976, the county started digging to build a new library, and they found the first clue: my father's trowel, buried upright in the dirt, exactly where his prize-winning hydrangeas used to be. If you've ever felt the weight of a secret that wasn't even yours, or carried a grief for something you couldn't understand, this story might resonate with you. Leave a comment below if you believe some mysteries are meant to be solved, no matter how long it takes. My name is Caden Vance, and I am 31 years old. For 21 of those years, I've been the son of the man who ran away. That's what they said. That's what the town of Oakwood, Washington decided. In 1955, I was 10. My father, Walter Vance, was, to me, the center of the world. He smelled of pipe tobacco and damp earth. His hands were strong but gentle, hands that could coax prize-winning roses from the stubborn clay soil of our valley. He was the president of the Oakwood Rose Society. It sounds quaint, I know. But for him, it was everything. It wasn't just about flowers. It was about community. He and the other 12 members, Mr. Henderson the baker, Ms. Petrov the librarian, Mr. and Mrs. Goldstein who ran the pharmacy, they weren't just gardening, they were building something. Then, on July 14th, 1955, they were gone. All 13 of them. The police chief at the time, a man named Greaves, who seemed to chew on his cigar more than smoke it, conducted an investigation. It lasted, I think, 2 days. The conclusion was simple: mass desertion. The society, it turned out, had managed a small community investment fund for a new town park. That fund was also gone. The story wrote itself. The respectable, church-going members of the Rose Society were nothing but common thieves. They'd embezzled the town's money and fled. There were, of course, other whispers. The more religious folks in town spoke of a cult, that the society was doing more than planting roses in that garden, that they'd been called away by some dark power. It was nonsense, but it stuck. Cultists or thieves. Take your pick. Either way, my mother, Josephine, and I were left behind. We became the family of the town's biggest traitor. My mother, she broke. Not all at once, but in 1,000 small ways. She was a proud woman, but the shame was too much. The other wives in town who used to drink coffee in our kitchen now crossed the street to avoid her. I was the thief's boy at school. I got into fights. I learned to be quiet. I learned to hate that dead, overgrown garden at the edge of town, its roses turning wild and thorny, a symbol of our family's disgrace. My mother and I never spoke of my father. Not really. His name became a locked door in our tiny, silent house. She just withered. I stayed in Oakwood. I don't know why. Maybe I thought if I left it would be an admission of guilt. Or maybe I just couldn't leave my mother. I got a job at the local hardware store, selling gardening supplies to the children of the people who had spat on my father's name. The irony was not lost on me. And so things stayed, frozen in that silent, painful ambiguity of 1955, for 21 years, until the phone call. It was a Tuesday, October 1976. I was restocking shelves with fertilizer bags. The phone rang at the front counter. "Caden, it's for you," my boss yelled. It was a man named Mark, the foreman for the new county library project. They'd broken ground last week, right on the site of the old Rose Society garden. The town council, in its infinite wisdom, had decided to pave over the last reminder of the scandal. "Mr. Vance?" The man's voice was gravelly. You might want to come down here, to the construction site. Why? What's wrong? A pause. We found something. The crew. Well, one of the old-timers recognized the name. We think it belonged to your father. My blood went cold. I drove my pickup truck to the site in a daze. The place I had avoided for 2 decades was now a landscape of raw, brown earth and yellow machinery. A small group of construction workers was gathered by a pit, the beginnings of the foundation. Mark, a big man in a hard hat, saw me and waved me over. "Mr. Vance," he said, pulling off his gloves. "Look, I'm sorry if this... Well, just look." He pointed down. Sticking out of the wall of the pit, about 2 feet below the original surface, was a tool. A gardening trowel. It was caked in black, rich soil, but I didn't need it to be clean. I knew it. I would have known it anywhere. The dark wood handle, worn smooth in all the right places. The slight, unique bend in the metal neck where my father had once tried to pry up a rock that was too big. One of the crew, an older man named Sal, spoke up. "I remember Walter," he said, his voice quiet. "He burned his initials into everything. WV said it kept the other society members from walking off with his tools." Mark nodded. "It's what's so strange, Mr. Vance. It wasn't flat, like it was dropped and buried over time. Look at the angle." He was right. It wasn't lying flat. It had been stabbed into the earth, handle up. A stake. A marker. It was a deliberate act. The bulldozer had just missed it, shearing away the dirt beside it, revealing it like an artifact in a tomb. "It was right under the root ball of that big old hydrangea bush we ripped out," Mark said. "Planted deep, like someone wanted it to stay put." My father's prize-winning hydrangeas. He'd been so proud of them. I reached out, my hand trembling, and pulled the trowel from the earth. It made a schlick sound as the suction of the clay released it. 21 years. It felt heavy, not just with dirt, but with time, with questions. Men who are fleeing in the night, thieves running from the law. They don't stop to deliberately bury their favorite tool 2 feet deep in the ground, handle up, under a specific bush. They just run. This wasn't an act of haste. It was an act of purpose. I took the trowel home. I didn't say anything to my mother at first. I went to the garage, to the old utility sink, and I began to wash it. The mud of 2 decades dissolved under the running water, revealing the rust-pitted blade and the dark, stained wood. And there, just as Sal had said, burned into the handle, were the letters WV. I was holding my father's hand. "What is that?" I jumped. My mother, Josephine, was standing in the doorway. She was 60 now, but she looked 80. Her hair was thin and white, her housecoat faded. She stared at the trowel in my hands, and her face, usually so blank and distant, crumpled. But it wasn't grief. It was terror. "Caden," she whispered, and it was a sound I hadn't heard in years, a sharp, raw plea. "Where did you get that?" "At the site," I said, my voice gentle. "They're digging for the library. It was in the ground." "Put it back," she hissed, stumbling forward. "Put it back now." "Mom, what are you talking about? It's Dad's." "They'll see you," she cried, grabbing my arm. Her fingers were like claws. "They'll know. Caden, you have to bury it again. Please." I was stunned. "Mom, who? Who will see me? Who is they?" The men who made him go." Her eyes were wild, darting to the windows. They said never look. They said if we ever dug, they would come back. They would hurt us. Oh, Walter. He promised he wouldn't, but he did. He left it. He left it for you. She was unraveling right in front of me. The secret she had held inside for 21 years was boiling over. Mom, I said, gripping her frail shoulders. Who made him go? He wasn't a thief, was he? No, she sobbed. He was a good man, the best man. They forced him to protect us, to protect you. Who, Mom? Who? She looked at me, her gaze suddenly sharp, lucid. The man who owns this town, Caden. The man who owned them all. Elias Thorne. Now put that thing away. Put it away and forget you ever found it. Elias Thorne, the founder of Oakwood, the man who had pledged to rebuild after the embezzlement, the man who had been the most vocal victim, claiming the Rose Society had stolen his investment too. He was still alive, an old, rich, powerful recluse in the mansion on the hill. I looked down at the rusty trowel. My father hadn't dropped it. He hadn't been fleeing. He had planted it. It wasn't a surrender. It was a signpost. My mother wanted me to forget. But as I stood there, the cold metal in my hand, I knew. Forgetting was no longer an option. The next day, I started to dig, not in the dirt, but in the past. My mother wouldn't speak of it again. The terror of that moment had sent her back into her shell, deeper than before. I was on my own. I started at the Oakwood Library, the old library, the one they were replacing. I went into the archives, a musty basement room that smelled of acidic paper and dust. I pulled the microfiche for the Oakwood Chronicle, July 1955. I scrolled through the blurry black and white pages. It was all there, just as I remembered. Rose Society vanishes. Town funds embezzled. Shock and betrayal. And there, on the front page, was a photo of a grim-faced Elias Thorne pointing to the Society's abandoned garden. The headline read, "Thorne, a betrayal of trust." Thorne. My mother's words echoed in my head. He owns this town. He had been the primary source for the entire story. He was the one who claimed the fund was missing. He was the one who provided the police with the Society's membership list. He had controlled the entire narrative. He'd painted himself as the victim, and my father, and 12 other people, as the villains. I needed help. I couldn't do this alone. If Thorne was as powerful as my mother believed, asking the local police would be useless, or worse, dangerous. I thought of Stanley Milburn. Stanley had been a reporter for the Chronicle back in the 50s, a real muckraker, from what I'd heard. He'd been thorns in the side of the town council for years until he was retired in the early 60s. He still lived in town, in a small house down by the river. I found him on his porch, reading a book. He was in his 70s, with a shock of white hair and glasses as thick as bottle bottoms. "Mr. Milburn?" He looked up, squinting. "You're Walter Vance's boy, aren't you?" "Caden, I'll be." "Yes, sir. I need to ask you about 1955, about my father." Stanley's face hardened. He closed his book and set it down. "Took you long enough," he said. "Get in here. I'll make coffee." His house was a beautiful, chaotic mess of books and stacked newspapers. He poured 2 cups of black coffee. "I never believed it," he said, sitting down. "Not for a minute." "You didn't? Walter Vance? A thief? Please. That man was the most honest person in Oakwood. And the Goldsteins? Ms. Petrov? All of them? No. That story stank from day one. But Elias Thorne? He had Chief Greaves in his pocket. He was the town council. The investigation was closed before it even began. I tried to poke around, and my editor, who played poker with Thorne every Thursday, told me to drop it, or I'd be writing obituaries for the rest of my career. I think you were right, I said. I told him about the trowel, about how it was planted, about my mother's terror, and her one-word accusation, Thorne. Stanley listened, his expression growing more and more intense. He leaned forward. Planted, you say? Stabbed in the ground? Yes, a marker. A marker? For what? I don't know. But Stanley, my mother said they were forced to go, to protect their families. Stanley was quiet for a long time. Then he stood up and went to a tall metal filing cabinet in the corner of his living room. I kept my old notes, he said, pulling a drawer open. Everything my editor wouldn't let me print. He produced a dusty file labeled Rose Society. Inside were his original typewritten notes from 1955. I talked to everyone who was left, he said, leafing through the pages. Neighbors, families. Most were in shock. But one interview always bothered me. He pulled out a single sheet. Arthur Lewis. He was a member of the society, the 13th member, but he didn't vanish. Why not? The official story? He was terribly sick with the flu that week, bedridden. When Greaves questioned him, Arthur claimed he knew nothing, said he was as shocked as everyone. A month later, he and his family sold their house for pennies on the dollar and moved to Oregon. Gone. Stanley tapped the page. Here's my note to myself. July 19, 1955. Spoke to Arthur Lewis on his porch. Man looks like he's seen a ghost. Claims flu, but he's got a fresh, nasty cast on his left leg. He's chain-smoking. Kept looking over his shoulder. When I asked about Thorne, he practically pushed me off his property. He wasn't sick. He was terrified. A broken leg, I whispered. A warning, Stanley said. They broke his leg to keep him quiet, to make sure he couldn't leave with the others. He was the one they left behind as a message to the other families. Stay quiet, or this is just the start. We have to find him, I said. We have to find Arthur Lewis. It took us 3 weeks. 3 weeks of cross-referencing old phone books, calling county clerks' offices in Oregon, and Stanley pulling in favors from old newspaper buddies. The trail was cold. Arthur Lewis had, it seemed, vanished as well. We finally caught a break. A property deed from 1956 in a small town outside Portland. Arthur Lewis. But the trail went cold again. He changed his name, Caden, Stanley said, frustrated. Sometime after 1956, we're at a dead end. I sat in his office, defeated. I looked at the trowel, which I now carried with me everywhere, wrapped in an oilcloth in my truck. A marker. My father had left a marker. What was I missing? My father, I said, thinking aloud. He was a gardener. He was meticulous. He labeled everything. W.V. What if Arthur Lewis did the same? What do you mean? Arthur was in the society. My father was the president. They were friends. My dad, he used to give the other members gifts. Engraved tools. Little brass plaques for their flower beds. What if Arthur's name? What if the new name has his initials? It was a crazy leap, but it was all we had. We went back to the records. We weren't looking for Arthur Lewis anymore. We were looking for A.L. 2 days later, Stanley found him. Alan Larson, lives in Coos Bay, Oregon. Bought a house in 1957, paid cash. I took the week off from the hardware store. I told my mother I was going fishing. I got in my truck, the trowel on the seat beside me, and I started driving south. The drive was 8 hours of rain and fog and my own thoughts. What was I going to say? "Hello, Mr. Larson. My name is Caden Vance. 21 years ago, your legs were broken and my father vanished. Can you tell me why?" I found the house, a tiny wind-beaten cottage right on the coast. I sat in my truck for an hour, watching the waves crash, just building up the nerve. Finally, I got out. I walked to the door. I knocked. A moment later, the door opened a crack. An old man, frail and thin, peered out at me. He looked haunted, just as Stanley's note had described. "Mr. Larson?" I said. "Mr. Alan Larson?" "Who's asking?" His voice was a dry rasp. "My name is Caden Vance. My father was Walter Vance, from Oakwood." The man's face went white. He tried to slam the door, but I was faster. I put my foot in the frame. "Please," I said, my voice desperate. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm not with him." "I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered. "Your name is Arthur Lewis," I said. "You were in the Rose Society. They broke your leg." He stopped pushing. His body seemed to deflate. He just stared at me. I unwrapped the trowel and held it up. "They're digging up the garden," I said. "I found this." Arthur, Alan, looked at the trowel, and his eyes filled with tears. He stepped back and opened the door. "Dear God," he whispered. "Walter's trowel. After all this time, he actually did it. Come in, son. Come in." His house was simple, clean. We sat at a small kitchen table. For a long time, he just stared at the trowel, turning it over in his shaking hands. "I haven't said that name. Arthur Lewis. In 20 years, he said. "I'm Alan Larson. I was made Alan Larson." "By Elias Thorne," I said. He flinched. "You say his name, and after all this time, I still expect the ceiling to fall in." "Mr. Lewis," I said, "what happened? Please. My mother, she's been a ghost for 21 years. I've spent my whole life as the son of a thief. I need to know." Arthur took a deep, shuddering breath, and he told me. "Walter was a good man," he started. "The best of us. And he was smart. The Rose Society. It wasn't just flowers, son. We were a civic group. We loved Oakwood. We wanted to make it better. Our big project was the new park, the one we were raising funds for." He explained that as part of the park proposal, the society, led by my father, had started to audit the town's books, just to see where their fund could be best applied. "And we found it," Arthur said, his voice dropping. "Walter found it. At first he thought it was a mistake, a bookkeeping error. But the numbers didn't just not add up. They were elaborate, fictional." "What do you mean?" "Elias Thorne didn't build Oakwood, Caden. He was laundering money through it. For decades. The bank, the lumber mill, all those civic projects. They were just fronts. We're a quiet valley. No one ever looked too closely. Thorne was using our town as a personal cleaning service for some very bad people back east. Mob money. My father, the gentle gardener, had stumbled onto a massive criminal enterprise." "What did you do?" I asked. "Walter wanted to go to the state police, but Thorne found out. We never knew how. Maybe Greaves, the police chief, was on his payroll. Of course he was. One night we had a society meeting. Thorne's men were waiting for us. They weren't from Oakwood. They were hard men, in suits." Arthur looked down at his leg. They broke my leg right there, in front of everyone. This is a warning, they said. Thorn was there. He laid it out for us. We had a choice. The choice was simple and brutal. We could be heroes, Arthur said, making air quotes. We could go to the police, and Thorn would have us all killed, our families too. He made it very clear. He knew where you slept, Caden. He knew where the Goldstein's daughter was at college. Or we could vanish. Thorn's plan was diabolical. He would provide them all with new identities, new lives, and enough cash to start over, scattered across the country. In return, they would take the blame for the missing park fund, money that Thorn himself was stealing. They would become the villains, and in doing so they would buy their family's safety. He gave us 24 hours, Arthur whispered. We were to walk away from our homes, our lives, everything. We were never to contact our families again. If we did, the deal was off. Our families would be silenced. I was the one he kept behind, the sick one, to be his eyes, to make sure your mother and the other wives, that they all behaved. The vanishing was a threat, a piece of leverage. My father, I said, my throat tight. The trowel. Arthur smiled, just a little. That was Walter. He was so angry, but so smart. The night before we were taken, he went to the garden, alone. I thought he was just saying goodbye to his roses. He came to my house after. He told me, I did something, Arthur. I left a marker. Because Thorn is a liar, and the truth is still buried in that garden. One day, this will all come out. And if I'm not there, I want someone to know where to dig. Dig for what? I said, leaning in. Arthur looked at me, his eyes bright. The proof, Caden, the real proof. Walter. He was the one auditing the books. He had the society's original ledger, the one where he'd been tracing all of Thorn's laundered money. He couldn't take it with him. They were watching him too closely. He couldn't destroy it. It was the only copy. So, he buried it. Where? He wrapped it in oilcloth. He buried it as deep as he could, right under his favorite hydrangea bush. If I'm ever gone, he told me it, and you get a chance. Tell my boy, tell Caden, the trowel points the way. I stared at the tool in my hands. It wasn't just a trowel. It was a map. My father hadn't just left a signpost. He'd left the ammunition. He'd left the truth, wrapped in oilcloth, waiting. I thanked Arthur. I told him he was safe, that I would handle it. I don't know if he believed me. I got in my truck and I started driving back to Oakwood. I broke every speed limit. It was nearly 4 in the morning when I hit the Oakwood town line. A cold, misty rain was falling. As I drove toward the center of town, my heart sank. Floodlights. I could hear the beep, beep, beep of a bulldozer in reverse. They were working a night shift. I slammed my truck to a stop and ran. The construction site was a mess of mud and rebar. A single bulldozer was digging in the exact spot I dreaded, the massive hole for the library's foundation. The area where the hydrangeas had been was gone. Just a deep, square pit. No, I whispered. No, no, no. I saw the foreman, Mark, standing by a trailer, drinking coffee. Mark! I shouted, running toward him. Vance, what the hell are you doing here? You have to stop. You have to stop digging. What? Are you crazy? We're on a deadline. You don't understand. There's something in there. Evidence. My father. A local cop, a young guy named Peters, who I'd gone to high school with, was on site as security. Caden, what's going on? You're trespassing. You have to stop him, I yelled, pointing at the bulldozer. I saw a dark, squarish object in the mud of the pit, right where the bulldozer's track was about to turn. It looked different from the other clumps of dirt. I didn't think. I just ran. I scrambled past the safety fence and slid down the muddy embankment into the pit. "Hey!" Mark shouted. The bulldozer operator stopped, his machine idling. "Caden, get out of there," Peters yelled, fumbling for his radio. I ignored them. I scrambled through the mud to the dark object. It was wrapped in something black and shiny. Oilcloth. "I found it," I gasped, tears mixing with the rain on my face. "I found it." I grabbed it. It was the size of a shoebox. As I turned, 2 more officers were at the lip of the pit. Peters was down in the mud with me. "Vance, you're under arrest," he said, grabbing my arm. "Fine," I said, holding the package to my chest. "Just fine. But you're taking this as evidence." They put me in the back of a cruiser, but they took the package. From my cell in the local jail, I made my one phone call. "Stanley," I said, "it's Caden. I'm in jail, but I have it. I have the proof. It's a ledger. My father buried it." "Good God, son," Stanley said. "Don't say anything else. Not to the local boys. Thorne's grandson is the new police chief. I'll make a call." Stanley, it turned out, still had some fight in him. He didn't call the chief. He called a contact at the state police, someone in Olympia, completely outside Thorne's sphere of influence. He told them a story about a 21-year-old mystery, a buried ledger, and a town held hostage by organized crime. At dawn, 2 state troopers and a state-level investigator walked into the Oakwood police station. They took the muddy oilcloth package. They took me into an interrogation room. I told them everything. Arthur Lewis, the broken leg, the threat, the money laundering, my father. They unwrapped the package. The oilcloth was decayed, but it had done its job. The leather-bound ledger inside was damp, and the pages were water-stained. But the ink, my father's meticulous, neat handwriting, was perfectly legible. Page after page of numbers, dates, and names that didn't belong in a small town's books. Elias Thorne was arrested an hour later at his mansion. He was 81 years old. He didn't even seem surprised. He just looked tired. The town broke. The story went national. The Garden of Secrets. Town's founder, a mob accountant. The whispers that had haunted my mother and me for 21 years were finally silenced, replaced by a truth that was louder and more shocking than any rumor. My father, Walter Vance, and the other 12 members of the Rose Society were declared heroes. The aftermath was strange. People apologized. People who had shunned me my whole life now wanted to shake my hand. It was hard to accept. The real healing came from somewhere else. A week after Thorne's arrest, my phone rang. "Is this Mr. Caden Vance?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes." My name is Elena. My father. His name was Arthur Lewis, or Alan Larson. He told me to call you. He saw the news. He said, Walter's boy did it. He set us free. He just wanted me to thank you." I met Elena in Portland a few days later. We sat and shared stories about the parents we had and the parents we had lost. Over the next few months, we heard from others. The children of the Goldsteins, the son of Ms. Petrov, a small, scattered community of us, the children of the vanished, all of us now in our 30s and 40s. We were no longer the children of thieves. We were the children of brave men and women who had sacrificed their entire lives to protect us. They built the library. It's beautiful. But they changed the plans. Out front, where the garden used to be, they planted a new one, a rose garden. There's a bronze plaque at the entrance. Dedicated to the memory of the Oakwood Rose Society, 1955, the truth, buried, never dies. I brought my mother to see it. It was the first time she had willingly left the house in years. She stood in front of the plaque, her hand on the cold metal, and she read my father's name. She cried. For the first time, she truly cried. I had the trowel with me. I'd cleaned it, polished the wood, shined the metal. It was a beautiful thing. I reached down and placed it at the base of the plaque, right in the soft dirt, handle up. A marker. My father was finally home. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have let the past stay buried, or would you have risked everything to find the truth? Subscribe if you believe every truth, no matter how deep, eventually surfaces.